go to our studio guest, Shepherd Mzinyathi, the president of the Zimbabwe Business Council, who's hot foot just off the plane from Harare, and also Gary van Staden, the senior political analyst at NKC African Economics. So just to start off with you, Shepherd, so you've just come back. How was it? What struck you about it?
I think it's quite peaceful. It's an unusual situation in Zimbabwe when it comes to election time. Everybody's free to walk however they want to walk. They're free to do whatever they want to do. Previously, with previous elections, we've seen people being afraid of being on the streets on election day, people being intimidated and all sorts of things. And I think President Mnangagwa has done extremely well in trying to put things together and give confidence to all the Zimbabweans such that they can go out there and vote freely and fairly. So far, so good. I think things are going extremely well.
Incredible, and the incredible thing for me about this whole thing is that, I covered elections there, a number of them in the 90s, and the violence was just like disgusting. Some of the things, people getting new suits, for instance, at Christmas, and people saying, no, they're an opposition supporter, they've been bought out by the MDC, and burning the house down and chasing them out. It's incredible to see what's happening, but Gary, just an initial, Gary van Staden, just an initial reaction from you about what you're seeing happening there in Harare.
I'm very encouraged by what we're seeing over there. I agree with my colleague entirely. I think that they've done an amazing job. I think that the institutions there running the election have gone above and beyond. I think that we can't, I think let's not get carried away. If we're going to expect a gold star election with all the bells and whistles, we're not going to get that. But what we are going to get, I think, is an election that broadly reflects the will of the people, that has an element of legitimacy, and is a credible outcome. And I think that is going to be the major thing to come out of this. I think that they've pulled it off. I think peacefully, yes. I don't think there's been widespread intimidation. I don't think there's been systematic rigging. I really don't think we're going to see any of that. So yes, congratulations. I think that we can, with this basis, I think we can move forward. But there's a little way to go yet. And what happens, what tends to happen in these elections is that, for example, and you having covered elections in Zimbabwe would know this, your urban vote comes in, the MDC is way in front. Then your slow counting rural vote comes in, and suddenly ZANU-PF wins. How did this happen? It must have been rigged. I think that sometimes I think that while we condemn African leaders for staying in office too long, I sometimes think that we need to have a harder look at opposition to always have fallback plans about we only lost because they rigged it. I think that ZANU-PF has suffered from its past. I think there's the chap who was just talking now about intimidation. I think he's remembering things that happened previously rather than recounting things that are actually happening now. So there's a long way to go, and I think there's going to be a lot of fighting and a lot of arguing and a lot of debate. But I think that when the smoke clears, I think Zimbabwe is going to be in a better place.
Gary, one thing that actually strikes me is when you go to Twitter and you do hear, see what Mr. Chamisa is going on about. He just tweeted today morning that the results are in, majority of the 10,000 polling stations. We're doing exceedingly well. Awaiting ZDC to perform the constitutional duty to announce the people's election results. Now, he is out there declaring something that hasn't been declared by the electoral body.
Yeah, that's a problem.
That is a problem.
It always is.
And putting the Electoral Commission on the spot to declare him the winner.
Exactly. I think that is a problem. I think that's when we talk about it, we haven't got out of the woods yet. I think that's very much part of the problem that we're going to be facing. People declaring a victory. Others saying that we have to win because the Women's League fasted every Friday. If we don't win, the election is rigged. So there's a lot of dangerous talk, and I think, and from all sides, and I think that is going to be part of the problem that we're going to have to get over the next couple of days.
I'm very fascinated when you say from both sides. Sounds like when Trump said there was violence on both sides. I want to hear your thoughts on the military, making it very clear that they might not particularly endorse or agree with a poll that does say that the victory is for the opposition.
Okay, my view is that it's completely wrong for the military to be coming out and ushering such statements. I think we need to respect the constitution of Zimbabwe. If the president is saying that elections must be held free and fair, everyone has a right to vote, and all of that, I think the military don't have a space in the voting process. They just need to accept what has happened, and we move from there. And basically my word is just to say, I think as Zimbabweans, whoever wins, whoever loses, we actually need to just come together so that we can build our nation and get it back to where it was previously. Yeah.
I think if I could just chip in on that point, I think, yes, the military often makes dangerous statements, but I also think that we tend to think, and I'm not sure whether you would agree, that we think Zimbabwe military, it's one monolithic block that is moving in the same direction. It's not. If there are elements of the military that are saying we're not going to accept that, that doesn't mean that every rank and file troopie is going to actually sort of say, we agree with you. So I agree with you 100%. The military has no role saying we're not going to do this, we're not going to salute Shanghai. I mean, this goes back. But I also think we need to be careful about saying the Zimbabwe military is all-powerful in a monolithic organization that is going to follow a single direction. I'm not sure that that's going to happen.
Sure. Well, speaking about Shanghai and the MDC, Nelson Chamisa, I just want to ask you what you think of the challenger. You mentioned that he's already wants to declare himself. I mean, age of 40, he's a very young man in Zimbabwean politics, as we know. But I just wonder sometimes, I mean, when I was reading up on him saying that he promised to bring the Olympics and the World Cup and a bullet train to Zimbabwe and stuff, it just smacks of almost naivety. I mean, what do you think of him?
I think the guy is just not mature. He's not mature enough to be able to handle a country like Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe has got different forces. You've got highly educated people. You've got politicians who think differently. I personally think the guy, they just need to give him time to mature so that he can be an actual good leader. Look, it's good to have good opposition, but what does that opposition consist of? So if, for instance, if you take a view on the tweet that he tweeted this morning, it's actually inciting violence because when they lose, people are going to think that, no, our leader saw that we were winning, so what happened? And what if they're losing for real?
But Shepherd, this is very fascinating when you say he's not mature. Someone who's been a cabinet minister before he was 30, someone as early as 25 was elected in office. How long would it take for him to actually mature? I'm talking JF Kennedy was by 40 also making such huge strides. What would it take for someone to mature and not declare himself a winner before the electoral body actually does?
So if you take, for instance, the guy went out there and said, no, if ZANU-PF wins, I'm going to give my young sister who's 18-year-old to the president to marry. You know, that's crazy. That's not like for someone who is there to be leading a country.
Sure.
You know, he's ushered a lot of statements. You cannot believe that this is the kind of leader people are running around following, think that is going to lead Zimbabwe. I personally don't think he's the best person, but I respect the vote of the people.
He seems very popular. Gary, what do you think, Nelson Chamisa? You think he's got a chance?
Of course he's got a chance. According to the opinion polls that we've seen, he's very close. But then again, that same opinion poll told me good luck Jonathan was going to win an election in Nigeria. But it is the only thing that we have. You see, that's the problem. On the basis of that, it's a very close election and we got a presidential runoff. which again is going to bring a whole host of other problems. And I semi agree with the idea that certainly at his personal level, I think Mr. Chamisa is displaying signs of immaturity. But I don't think that it necessarily means that a 40-year-old can't run the country.
No, sure. And the
and
world's changing.
I don't think
Yeah.
my colleague is saying that. But
Yeah.
and I also think that yes, he's a welcome breath of fresh air. He's brought perhaps an element of unity to the opposition. I mean, you know, the 2013 election, the MDC lost. The ZANU-PF didn't have to rig that election. The MDC was disintegrating all over the place, you know, and I think that there is now at least the MDC alliance is a viable kind of thing. I mean, a couple of years ago we were talking about Joyce Maju and what she was going to do, and there was a splinter this and a splinter that.
Sure.
So yes, there has been some achievement, but I do tend to agree that some of the statements are like bordering on schoolyard stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Gary, is this the new age of politics, where you actually do promise walls across people's borders, and you promise Olympics, and you make all these outrageous promises to a very unsuspecting, maybe somewhat naive and short-sighted people in the rural side to give you a vote? I think that certainly you got a point there. I mean, we promised people that one country promised it was going to take itself out of the European Union, and it looks like now it's going backwards so fast that you know. Considering a second
vote, let's have another look at this, you know. And as you say, some of the statements by Donald Trump and others, perhaps there is an element of let's promise the world and see what happens. But I think perhaps, as we in South Africa might be discovering quite soon, it comes back to bite you at some point. But yes, I think it might well be part of the new world politics. It's part of the Twitter brigade. It's part of social media. You know, we have circumstances now that are completely friggin' different to anything that we've seen before in respect of mass participation in elections. I saw this. I saw that. You know, so to sift the truth out of this is often very difficult.
And maybe with Chamisa and his age, just the world is changing finally. I mean, when I first started moving in Zimbabwean political circles, probably about 25 years ago, the politician would say, "Oh no, that one, he's a boy," you know. And I said, "How old is he?" 65. So I think probably things are changing for the better, you know. I mean, absolutely. I think I was just remembering the other day. And it shows when you had a long career, you got a long memory. But I remember Nelson Chamisa. He used to be with Changarai when they first started. He was one of the guys who used to run around and do the stuff and go up and downstairs and call people. And it's incredible now what he's actually achieved.
I think he's paid his dues. I think he's paid his dues. But I think perhaps what he could have done with, perhaps if Changarai stayed around a little longer as a mentor, you know, I think that might perhaps have been.
Sure.
And I also think just that Zimbabweans are just desperate for change. All they've known is ZANU-PF, and they're just accepting anything that's there that can unseat ZANU-PF. But if you really look at what's currently happening since Emmerson Mnangagwa took over, he's doing a great job. He's done exceptionally well. I think the economy is moving. Things are changing every day. And people shouldn't just expect that, you know, over 24 hours we're going to have cash in Zimbabwe. This is going to happen. We're going to have jobs. People need to be patient. The guy is doing his job. He's doing extremely well. We as Zimbabwe Business Council, we actually work very closely with the government of Zimbabwe. There's a lot of initiatives coming up. And people need to be patient. I also hope he wins, and we've got like a mature person who is able to lead the country forward.
This is very fascinating. Let's talk about the other side of the coin, who is Emmerson Mnangagwa. And when Ronald Reagan was 73, he was asked about the inexperience and the age of his opponents, and he said he would not exploit for political purposes his opponent's youth and inexperience. At 75, wouldn't one argue that maybe Mnangagwa is a little too old and has been around for quite a very long time?
Look, it's possible in both ways, but if you also look at our age, I'm 41 years old, and we've got very good leaders below even my age. You just need to look at the person's character, what they're able to deliver, how they deal with the people, how they interact with Zimbabwe at large. So I don't really think it's an issue of saying whether it's a young person or an older person. As much as I'm 41 years old, there are younger people than me that are ruling countries out there, and they're doing that very well. There are older people that are over 75 that are doing the same thing as well. So all we want is a good leader who's mature enough to understand that he has to service the people.
And Mnangagwa again, isn't he still tainted in some ways? He's been part of the cabinet since 1980. He was one of Mugabe's most trusted lieutenants. He was involved in the Gukuruhundi massacres in Bulawayo in the early 80s. Isn't he still got that kind of skeleton in his cupboard?
Absolutely he does. And I think that we need to. I think he does. But you know, as much as the opposition has a problem with being too young, Mnangagwa does actually. There is an issue of him being too old and he has too much baggage. But then the point is, what you know, within ZANU-PF, perhaps if he's examined all of this and thought, well, if we shove up someone else, then we might not. You know, this might not work out. You know, should we find someone in the G40, you know, who were in bed with Grace Mugabe, which was worse, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know, where do we go from here? I think generally, you know, there comes a time when leaders need to say, okay, I need to step down.
Yeah.
But in this case, you know, I think perhaps even if Mnangagwa wanted to do that, I think ZANU-PF was saying to him, well, you know, really, if you say you're not going to do this, there's going to be one hell of a bun fight here, and that's going to impact us negatively on the election. You know, we're going to be fighting with each other about who's going to be the president. We've had that phase with Grace Mugabe trying to lop off the heads of everyone who was likely to succeed her husband to clear the path literally for herself or for her chosen person. So there's a number of issues. There are a number of issues here, and I think that ZANU-PF probably thought this is not an ideal situation, but he's probably the best of what he's going to be. Let's think about elections. He's going to do best for us in the polls rather than trying to find someone else.
Yeah, looking at the experience as well, Mnangagwa has been there for a long time. He's worked with Mugabe. I think there's a time when they were doing very well, and just the experience that he has, I think that should just make the point that currently is the best candidate to lead ZANU-PF.
And just say one last, we're going to a break now, one last question for you is that the day I was reading about Mnangagwa, people were saying that an old elite that's hanging on to the glories of a war that finished 40 years ago. I just thought that was harsh, but I don't know. Do you think that's what they are?
Not necessarily. I think politics is also a career. So the question is, you can move from one stage to the next stage, and then you say, where do we go from here? It's like saying, no, you've been a doctor for 40 years and then you can't be a doctor on the 41st year because you've been there for 40 years, the young people that needs to be doctors. So it's not about war. I think it's a career and we should respect that.
Right, gentlemen, just to allow us to put a pause on this particular conversation. Gary, I'm afraid we'll have to actually let you go, but we'll be back with more of this special coverage. We've been speaking there to Gary van Staden, who's a senior political analyst at NKC African Economics. More of his special coverage right after the break.